The year is 1846, and the place is Illinois. The time, the height of summer. The nearly 90 pioneers about to leave for California are in high spirits. They have come to be known as the Great Departure. They're full of hope, leaving behind the only life they've ever known, chasing the promise of gold in California's promised land. Families, wagons, and children smile under the hot summer sun. But beneath this veneer of optimism, there is tension. There are hidden rivalries, impatience, and a dangerous choice that will doom them all. As we meet our characters, there's a sense of foreboding. The reader is made aware of the ox-drawn wagon train and its importance to those who travel it. It's not just a means of transport. It's their home, their protection, and their sustenance. In fact, it is the very essence of their survival. These pioneers have put their entire life savings into their wagons, believing that the journey to California will be worth every penny. They believe that the journey will take 6 months to complete. Little do they know that this is just the beginning of their problems. There are 2 families who stand out among the rest. The Reed family consists of 2 married couples, George and Eliza Reed, and John and Lucy Brown, who are brother and sister. Also traveling with them is their friend Thomas Hart, whose wife, Elizabeth, is pregnant. The other family is that of James and Sarah Gregory, who have 8 children. The 2 families have been friends since childhood and are looking forward to starting a new life together in California. However, they have a big problem. The wagon train won't move until the captain gives the order, and he has a big decision to make. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the captain's daughter, Mary, is busy planning her own future. She's in love with a man named Kenneth, but her father won't allow her to marry him because he's not a member of their church. As the story progresses, the reader learns more about the characters and their relationships with each other. Tensions rise as the group prepares to depart. George Reed is impatient and wants to get on the road. His sister-in-law, Lucy, is concerned about the welfare of the group and wants to wait until the men finish repairing the wagons. This creates a rift between the 2 families, which will only grow as the story unfolds. The Great Departure is a story of adventure, danger, and faith. It's a story of pioneers who left everything behind to search for gold in California's promised land. Along their journey, they face many challenges, including attacks from Native Americans, harsh weather conditions, and the threat of starvation. Through it all, they must also deal with the tensions and conflicts that arise among the members of the wagon train. As the story reaches its climax, the group is faced with a terrible choice that will determine their fate. Will they be able to survive the journey and reach their destination, or will they perish along the way? What did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to watch more stories like this. I'm going to tell you about the time that one of our characters got really lost. In the year 1848, a man named Lansford Hastings led an expedition across the Great Basin Desert in what is now the southwestern United States. And his route became known as Hastings Cutoff. In fact, he cut off a whole bunch of time by taking this route. But it was really dangerous and difficult. And he actually ended up losing a lot of men. So when people think of Hastings Cutoff, they think of it as like a cautionary tale. But in our game, our characters are desperate to get to Oregon's Willamette Valley before winter. And so they're going to take this so-called shortcut, even though they know that it's probably going to be pretty terrible. Now, at this point in the story, our characters have already been traveling for many months. They've left Independence, Missouri in the early spring. They've gone through a lot of hardship already. And in their minds, they can see the end of their journey, the glorious green fields of the Willamette Valley. And so they're willing to risk almost anything to get there quicker. And this is how we started our session. Our characters are coming down a ridgeline, and they can see below them a beautiful valley. And it looks very green and lush, and it seems like it could be the valley of the Willamette River. And so they send out Caleb, who is a halfling rogue, to go check it out. And while he is gone, they start making their way down into the valley. Now, it turns out that this was actually a trick. The valley was beautiful, but it wasn't the valley of the Willamette River. It was actually just a mirage, and the real valley was still many miles to the north. And so Caleb comes back and tells everyone that, yeah, he went to check it out and it's not the right valley. And so they all feel pretty bad because they wasted some time. But there is a shortcut here, a really dangerous shortcut, and they're going to take it. And the shortcut is basically just a cattle trail that goes across the desert. There's no guarantee that this will work. There's no guarantee that it will lead anywhere good. But they're desperate, and so they're going to do it. They send out Caleb again to scout ahead, and then they start making their way across the desert. Now, immediately, things start going wrong. One of the wagons gets stuck in the mud. They lose several oxen trying to get the wagon unstuck. Another wagon gets knocked over by a fallen tree and has to be repaired. And after many, many days of traveling, they finally find water, but it's really, really gross. And, in fact, the only way to make it drinkable is to boil it. And boiling water in this situation is going to take a long time, and they don't have a lot of time to spare. So eventually they just start drinking the water unboiled, and shortly thereafter they start getting sick. And so at this point, our characters are exhausted, and they're sick, and they're thirsty, and their wagons are broken. And they're like, maybe the shortcut isn't such a great idea. Maybe we should have just kept following the river. And so that's where we're going to end our session, with them realizing that the shortcut has become a curse rather than a blessing. As game masters, we often want to reward players for being clever, or for finding shortcuts, or for doing things that are outside of the norm. But sometimes those rewards aren't exactly what the players are expecting. And in this case, the players expected to save time by taking the shortcut, but instead they lost weeks. But I hope that you don't lose any time by watching this video. I hope you gained a little bit of time by watching this video. Thank you so much for watching. The crisp mountain air nipped at their faces, biting through any warmth their thick jackets could provide. The sky, once a cheerful blue, was now a brooding gray, heavy with the promise of snow. For the Donner Party, their journey through the Sierra Nevada had turned into a nightmare. It was December 1846, and the pioneers had reached the base of the mountain range only to be met by an unrelenting storm that had other plans for them. Day after day, the snow fell, burying the mountain passes in a thick blanket of white. Their leader, George Donner, made the decision to wait out the storm, hoping for a reprieve that never came. With each passing hour, the isolation increased, transforming their camp into a shrinking island of humanity amidst a rising sea of snow. The wagons were their lifeline, their homes on wheels, repositories of their hopes and dreams for a new life in the fertile valleys of California. But now, those very wagons were beginning to sink into the white silence, their wheels mired in the thick, heavy snow. Amongst the travelers were two brothers, Elias and James Reed. Fearful that the wagons would be buried completely, they decided to take matters into their own hands. With numbed fingers and backs bent against the wind, they began to dig. Each movement was a battle against the cold, each breath a small victory over the numbing cold. But their efforts, along with those of the others, seemed almost futile. The storm showed no signs of relenting. As night fell, the wind began to howl, whipping the snow into a frenzy and piling it high against the wagons. Huddled inside their homes on wheels, the families tried to keep warm, sharing what little food they had left. Stories and songs were exchanged, weaving a tapestry of sound that did little to dispel the growing sense of dread. Outside, the temperature plummeted, the snow continued to fall, and the wind moaned its mournful tune. Hope, like the setting sun, began its slow descent. Each family gathered close, seeking solace in the warmth of their loved ones. They prayed for a miracle, for the storm to abate, for the sun to break through the clouds, and for the wagons to be freed from their icy graves. But the mountains, it seemed, had other plans. The storm raged on, and with it the fear grew, gnawing at their hopes and chilling their dreams. As the days turned into a blur of white, the reality of their situation sunk in. They were trapped by the unforgiving snow, trapped by the relentless cold, and trapped by the gnawing fear of what might come next. In the face of this daunting reality, The pioneers had to make an almost impossible choice. Should they stay put and wait for rescue, or should they venture out into the white wilderness and try to find help? The decision hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the brutal choice the mountain had forced upon them. As the fire sputtered in the gathering darkness, casting long dancing shadows, the men of the Donner Party looked at one another, their faces grim, their eyes reflecting the dying embers of their hope. There was no easy answer, no clear path to safety. All they had was the fading warmth of the fire, the fading light of day, and the fading hope of rescue. And so the night wore on, filled with the crackle of the fire and the murmur of voices, each voice echoing the same fear, the same uncertainty, the same desperate hope for a different dawn. Little did they know that the mountain had already claimed them, and their story was about to become a chilling tale whispered around campfires. A tale of the Donner Party and their harrowing ordeal in the heart of the Sierra Nevada. I don't know if this thing is still there, but when I was a kid, my folks and we used to go camping up in the Beartooth Wilderness in the summer, and one night we woke up in our tent to what sounded like screams in the forest. Big, guttural screams. My dad, being the ever-resourceful dad that he is, he took a big stick and he put it outside the tent right by his side as we slept. And lo and behold, in the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, we unzipped the tent and the stick was bent in half. Now, my dad never admitted this, but I think he was a little freaked out by the whole situation. So we never went back to that tent site. Now, this story comes from another IO9 reader. It's about a mountain that moves people. This mountain is in the Beartooth Wilderness in the summer of 1867. A group of settlers made their way into the mountains. They were looking for a new homestead, someplace away from the encroaching civilization. They found it here in this lush valley with a sparkling lake and towering rock faces. It was perfect. There was just one small problem. The mountain didn't like them being there. As the weeks passed, the settlers began to run out of supplies. The food they brought with them dwindled and the mountain seemed to take notice. At night, they would hear what sounded like screams in the forest. Big, guttural screams. Then the children began crying themselves to sleep, begging for bread. One evening, the settlers saw what they thought were shadows moving among the pines. Some of the braver souls ventured out into the blizzard to investigate, but they always came back empty-handed or more frightened than before. Then one day, young Tommy Davis wandered away from the camp and disappeared. Searchers found his little sled upside down at the foot of the hill, but there was no sign of the boy. The settlers whispered that the mountain was taking its revenge. Maybe it didn't like having people in its domain, or maybe it was protecting something. They didn't know, but they believed that whatever was up there was watching them, waiting for them to leave. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks and the food supply continued to dwindle, the settlers began to pack up and leave. As they moved their belongings down the hill, they could have sworn they heard a rumble, like the sound of a very large animal moving. Then they saw it. The rock face of the mountain itself seemed to shift and change, as though the mountain was itself watching them. Now, some of the braver souls wanted to stay and fight for their homes, but most of them were ready to go. So they packed up their things and started the long trek down the mountain. They never looked back. Now, over the years, there have been other reports of strange occurrences in the Beartooth Wilderness. Hikers have reported seeing strange lights in the forest and hearing disembodied voices. Some have even reported seeing the shadow of a giant moving through the trees. Could there be something up there in the mountain? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the wind in the trees. But one thing is for sure, if you're ever in the Beartooth Wilderness and you hear a scream in the forest, big, guttural scream, don't go outside. Just stay in your tent and hope that whatever is out there doesn't find you. So, do you believe in Sasquatch? Let me know in the comments below. And also, are there any creepy camping stories that you want to share with us? Send them to the email below and they might be featured in a future episode. Also, if you liked this episode, please subscribe and give it a good rating. That really helps us out. And if you want to help us research these videos, join our community on a website. And with that said, Until next time, happy camping. In the beginning, it was the exhaustion that got them. One by one, the stragglers succumbed to the bitter cold, collapsing into the swirling snow and never rising again. Then it was the sickness that claimed the rest, burning their lungs with every rattling breath, stealing their appetites and leaving them too weak to trudge on. Their bodies were buried in the shallow snowdrifts that mark the endless white fields they now inhabited. But the frozen ground resisted their shovels, and the bodies were soon covered in ice. They were so close to the coast, just a few more miles and they would have made it. But here, out on this God-forsaken sea, the wind had the strength of a winter wolf and the bite of a blizzard. It was here that the second death began. Hunger. At first, it was bearable, a dull ache in their bellies that reminded them of their lost humanity. They had been castaways for so long that the concept of food had become foreign, a figment of a forgotten life. But the snow kept falling and the hunger grew, becoming a monster that gnawed at their insides. The first to fall was an old woman. No one remembered her name, only that she had been kind to children and animals, the worst sufferers in their little band of survivors. She died kneeling beside a drift, her hands still clasped in prayer. The second was a young mother. She didn't cry for the loss of her child or the destruction of her world, only that he wouldn't have to be hungry anymore. The third was a man who had once been a soldier. He stood up against the biting wind and spat. In his mouth, a thin stream of blood mixed with ice, he cursed God and the world, then fell face down in the snow and never moved again. And then they began to dig up the dead. It wasn't done out of disrespect or despair, but necessity. The hunger had become a living thing inside their chests, clawing at their ribs and screaming for release. There were no hard feelings, only understanding glances and the clink of metal on metal as they cut the bonds that held the corpses tight. Then they ate, not with manners or grace, but with the ravenous hunger of wolves. They tore into the frozen flesh and sucked the marrow from the bones, feeling the life essence trickle down their throats like liquid fire. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but they couldn't stop. They needed sustenance, and this was all that was around. Besides, the dead didn't need their flesh anymore. They had bigger plans. The survivors saw the glint of insanity in each other's eyes, the same glint they saw in their own reflections. It was born of fatigue, exposure, and a bottomless pit of hunger, a madness that whispered promises of warm hearths and full bellies. Some fought against it, clinging to their humanity by a thread, but most embraced it. After all, what did they have left to lose? The whispers turned into screams, and the survivors fell prey to the blizzard in their minds. They began to see the ghosts of the dead in the swirling snow, specters that mocked them with their lost humanity. They heard the voices of the damned, calling to them from the frozen wastes, promising salvation to those who followed. Then the sun came up, pale and cold, a sliver of bone in the vast expanse of the white sky. It glinted off the shovel that lay abandoned in the snow, a silent accusation ringing through the frozen wasteland. The survivors looked at it, then at each other, their faces masks of grime and despair. They knew they could bury the dead no deeper than the grave, for the cold ground had hardened over their shallow graves. And now there was nowhere left to hide from the truth. When all hope is lost, there's always a glimmer of insanity left. Our story begins in a nameless city. For 40 days and 40 nights, it has been raining cats and dogs, so much so that the river had overflowed its banks and swallowed the low-lying areas, including the city's water treatment facility. The lack of clean water and sanitation, coupled with insufficient food supplies, had to push the residents to the edge. 15 of the strongest set out on foot to find help. They carried little food, no map, and just their faith to guide them. Within a few days, their food supplies ran out, forcing them to forage for berries and nuts. By the end of the second week, their clothes were torn and their faces were bruised from constant exposure to the elements. But they pressed on, driven by the hope of finding civilization. On the 28th day, a man named Tom stumbled upon an old abandoned farmhouse. Hope surged through his veins. Maybe they'd finally be able to rest. But as the others approached the house, one of them, John, collapsed and died right there in the middle of the road. Hope turned to despair. They were too late. He was already gone. Fear began to creep in. What if they were next? Would they have to resort to cannibalism? They couldn't risk it, so they buried him immediately and continued on their journey. By the 32nd day, hunger and exhaustion were taking their toll. Another woman, Mary, fell victim to the unforgiving terrain. This time, they didn't even bother to bury her. The living were beginning to envy the dead. 3 days later, their leader, Jacob, succumbed to his injuries and became the 5th casualty. With each passing day, the group grew weaker. Their bodies, ravaged by hunger and thirst, began to shut down. Some developed rashes. Others started hallucinating. All of them were one step away from losing their minds. On the 39th day, what little sanity they had left evaporated. They had seen horrible things, done horrible things. The relentless hunger had driven them to the edge. Then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, they saw another farmhouse. This time, it wasn't abandoned. A family had been living there, hidden away from the world. The 15 survivors, driven by desperation, attacked the family, killing them all. It was every man for himself, or rather, every person for themselves. As they feasted on the family's food, one of the women, Sarah, found a diary detailing the family's harrowing journey. In it, she learned about the outside world. There had been a nuclear disaster. The entire nation was a radioactive wasteland. Help would never arrive. The worst part, they weren't even on the right path to seek help. According to the diary, they were walking in circles, retracing their own steps without realizing it. They had become a desperate, deranged cult, ready to kill anyone who crossed their path. But not everyone was pleased with the turn of events. A young girl named Lucy refused to participate in the killings. She had seen enough death and destruction. Instead, she took care of the wounded and tried to offer comfort to the dying. The other cult members, however, were too far gone. They didn't see the humanity in Lucy's actions. They only saw a threat to their way of life, and so they killed her. By the time the insane cult reached the 50th day, there were only 2 of them left, a man and a woman. Both were severely malnourished and their clothes had long since disintegrated. They wandered aimlessly, their minds shattered beyond repair. As they walked past a puddle, the man stopped. Looking at his reflection, he saw a monster staring back at him. Without warning, he attacked the woman, ending both their miserable lives. There were no more tears, no more screams, only the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. The rain continued to pour, washing away the last traces of humanity from the earth. And so the story ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The 15 who had set out on that fateful journey had become 0, victims of their own desperation. Their tale is a grim reminder of the fragility of the human psyche. When push comes to shove, there are no heroes, only survivors. And sometimes being alive isn't all that different from being dead. The wind outside is furious, a blizzard of flesh and blood. It claws at the walls of the camp, trying to claw its way inside. The feeble light of the dying sun bleeds through the tattered canvas, painting stripes of crimson across the muddy ground. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something cloying sweet like burnt sugar. It's the smell of roasted meat, the smell of human flesh. I huddled deeper into my threadbare blanket, pulling my knees up to my chest. Outside the hut, I hear the scraping of metal on metal, the shouts of men, the terrified squeals of pigs. Then silence, heavy and thick as the snowdrifts piling up against the walls. Then a new sound, a rhythmic thump, 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 like a drumbeat in the distance. A low, guttural chant rises above the wind, weaving its way into the trees. It sounds like a funeral dirge, a lament for the dead. But there's something else in the chant, something that makes the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. It's triumph, the thrill of the hunt, the joy of the kill. I pull my blanket tighter around me, burying my face in the worn fabric. What are they doing out there? What are they bringing back to the camp? My stomach growls, a hollow echo in the small space. I haven't eaten since yesterday, since we fled the city. We were running from the Feast of Shadows, a celebration of the longest night of the year, when the veil between the worlds is thinnest and the creatures of darkness most active. And tonight was the worst. The creatures had stalked our streets, taking what they wanted, leaving only death and despair in their wake. We thought we'd escaped when we made it to the camp, a place of safety, or so we believed. Now the shadows have followed us here. I hear footsteps crunching in the snow outside the hut. The door flaps open, letting in a gust of wind and snow. A tall, gaunt man steps inside, his face obscured by the folds of his threadbare coat. He's carrying a large bucket in one hand and a long knife at his side. His eyes, though, I can't help but look at his eyes. They're the eyes of a predator, cold and hard and filled with a terrible, terrible hunger. He sees me watching him and smiles, a slow, cruel smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Hungry?" he asks, his voice raspy as if unused for a long time. I nod, unable to speak. The man sets the bucket down with a thud and pulls out a long spoon. He ladles out some stew, the steam rising to meet me halfway. It smells delicious, like spiced beef and caramelized onions, like bread fresh from the oven. The man brings the bowl closer and I can see something else in the depths, something dark and glistening. "Eat," he says, his voice a harsh whisper. "Eat and be strong." I take the bowl from him, my hands shaking. The man watches me for a moment, his gaze intense, unwavering. Then he turns and goes back out into the storm, leaving me alone with my food and the darkness. I stare at the bowl in my hands, the delicious smell making my stomach growl louder. I want to eat, need to eat, but I can't. Not after what I saw, not after what I heard. What I saw in the flickering lamplight, the gleam of metal in the man's eyes, the glint of teeth as he smiled. What I heard in the scrape of his boots on the frozen ground, the whisper of his voice. I know what's in that bowl. I just don't want to admit it to myself. I bring the bowl closer, willing myself to look, to see. As the last of the daylight fades, as the shadows grow longer and deeper, I see it. It's just a pile of ashes. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. I'm safe. I am safe. But then I hear it again, that rhythmic thump, 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 like a drumbeat in the distance. And I know I'm not safe. No one here is safe. Because beyond those flimsy wooden walls, beyond the protective circle of the camp, the creatures are waiting. And when the moon is high and the snow is deep, they come for us. They come for us all. They come for us all. The creatures of the night, they come for us all. And the Feast of Shadows has just begun. Please contrast this with what's happening now. The makeshift cabins are becoming prisons. Inside them, starving mothers rock lifeless infants. Fathers sharpen knives in silence. The line between nightmare and reality is gone. You can feel it in the air, thick and heavy like the fog that's rolling in. And tonight, we are going to tell you a story about survival. A story about a group of people who found themselves in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. We don't know how many people are out there. Maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe more. All we know is their names: John, Mary, Kate, Billie Eilish. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3. The days melt into one another. Hunger gnaws at their bellies, thirst at their throats. What was once a desperate search for food becomes a desperate search for water. And water turns to ice. Their breath hangs in the freezing air, each exhale a ghost that vanishes into the gray. In the flickering firelight they see pale faces peering through the frozen window panes. Faces that vanish when the fire sputters and dies. Faces that return with the dawn and mock them with their ghastly grins. Are they real or imagined? That's the question. Just as important, should they care? Hope flickers and dies. Panic rises, grips them by the throat and shakes them like a rag doll. Days turn to weeks. Weeks turn to a month. Where has the world gone? Why have they been forsaken? Desperation claws at them, twists their minds into knots. John sees Mary drinking from a puddle. He stumbles toward her, wanting to share in the precious liquid. But she pushes him away, her eyes wild, her hands shaking. She sees something in the puddle that he doesn't, something that terrifies her, something she wants to keep from him. One by one, they succumb to the icy grip of despair. One by one, they lose their minds. They huddle in the corner, shivering not just from the cold but from the terror that's coiled in their guts. Where is God? Where is help? Why are they being punished? Why? The wind moans outside the cabin, a mournful sound that echoes their pain. It seems to understand their anguish, to mock them with its indifference. It carries with it the scent of snow, of death, of ages past when men first learned to fear the winter's bite. They had tried to outrun it, to escape its icy fingers, but it had been too late. The blizzard had trapped them here, buried their hopes under a blanket of white. Now they are prisoners in a frozen hell, trapped with their own demons, with the ghosts of their past and the specters of their future. There is no escape. There is no hope. There is only the unending, uncaring white. As the last fire sputtered and died, leaving them in total darkness, as the wind screamed its mournful song, as the snow fell silently and steadily, they knew they were truly alone. No one was coming to rescue them. They were on their own, and in the vast, uncaring wilderness, they were utterly, terrifyingly alone. It is a story that could have been ripped from the pages of a horror novel, a story of human beings pushed to the very edge, a story of survival. If you like such kind of stories, then please stay tuned because we will be bringing you more. The wind was a relentless beast, whipping around the mountainside, carrying with it the scent of death and despair. It had been 3 weeks since the avalanche, 3 weeks since the world had ended for those trapped in the snow. And now the faint sound of hope, a helicopter, cut through the wind. Rescue, or what was left of it, had arrived. 14 people were pulled from the wreckage, but by then, 5 had already lost their battle with the elements. Of the living, some stumbled out, their eyes vacant, their bodies ravaged by cold and hunger. Others, the bravest or perhaps the most desperate, refused to leave. They clung to the corpses of their loved ones, shielding them with their bodies, guarding the dead as if still alive. A mother cradled her dead child. A man held on to his wife, their faces frozen in a silent scream, forever young, forever in love. Among the survivors were children, 4 of them, their bodies frail, their eyes hollowed by fear and starvation. One couldn't stand. He collapsed onto the snow, his thin arms offering a pathetic salute to the rescuers. Another looked up, his gaze distant, as if already lost in the cold embrace of death. When they tried to pull him from the wreckage, he cried, his voice hoarse and weak, Don't leave me. I want to stay with my mommy." His pleas echoing the sentiments of many. Some didn't want to be saved, not without their loved ones. Hope, it seemed, was a luxury they could no longer afford. As the helicopter whirred overhead, casting fleeting shadows on the snow, one woman emerged from the wreckage. She was wrapped in a blanket, her face hidden, her eyes downcast. She walked slowly, each step a monumental effort, and sat down heavily on a nearby rock. Her rescuers, unprepared for the sight that greeted them, rushed to her side. The woman raised her head, and in that moment, the world shifted. Her eyes, wide and filled with unspeakable horrors, stared into theirs. Time seemed to stop. The wind ceased its mournful song, and the only sound was the beating of her heart, a frantic tattoo against the silence. Then she screamed, a primal, wordless cry that tore through the quiet like a shard of ice. It was a cry that encapsulated the pain, the fear, the despair of an entire nation, a cry that echoed the trauma of generations past. Her scream died down, leaving behind a ringing silence that amplified the weight of her unspoken words. When she finally found her voice, it was a mere whisper, yet it cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "My God, they're all gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I couldn't save them." Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the snow that had transformed into a grotesque mask of grief. The rescuer, a man with kind eyes and weathered hands, knelt beside her. He understood the depth of her despair, the crushing weight of loss. Slowly, gently, he began to speak, his voice a balm to her shattered soul. "It's all right, ma'am," he said, his words careful, measured. "You did what you could. We all did." His gaze, filled with empathy, held hers. "Let's get you back to the others, shall we?" But as the rescuers moved closer, a chilling sight met their eyes. The bodies they had come to retrieve were not alone. Scattered around them were body bags, their contents a grim testament to the tragedy that had unfolded here. The full extent of the disaster, the lives irrevocably broken by the unforgiving mountain, was finally revealed. Each step they took was a descent into the heart of darkness, a journey into the abyss of human suffering. The secrets of the snow were being laid bare, and there was no escaping the haunting tableau that lay before them. The horror of it all pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket of despair. In the face of such overwhelming tragedy, words failed, questions went unanswered, and the heavy silence was broken only by the sobs of a grieving woman. The rescuers, hardened by their experiences, felt their resolve waver. For in this desolate landscape, they were confronted not only with the physical toll of the disaster, but also with the haunting specter of human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. Are you afraid of the dark? Well, then this story is definitely for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, we would like to thank you all for the support you've given us. Now, let's get started with today's video. Have you ever heard of the Donner Party? They were a group of American pioneers who traveled west from Illinois to California in 1846. Their journey took them through the treacherous Sierra Nevada mountains, where they became trapped by a heavy snowstorm and had to resort to cannibalism to survive. Only a little over half of the party survived the ordeal, and those that did were forever changed by their experience. But some believe that the horrors of the Donner Party didn't end there. Even after their ordeal ended, the survivors were forever haunted by the experience. And some say that the spirits of those lost to the mountains still linger nearby. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of strange and eerie occurrences in the area, leading many to believe that the spirits of the Donner Party still roam the Sierra Nevadas. One of the most common sightings is that of strange whispers and footsteps. Hikers and campers who spend the night near Donner Lake have reported hearing whispers in the darkness, voices that seem to come from nowhere and carry on long into the night. Some have even reported hearing footsteps circling around their tents, as if someone or something is trying to get inside. These sightings are particularly eerie considering that the area was once home to the Donner Party, who spent the night in and around this very area. It's said that these whispers and footsteps are the spirits of the Donner Party members who died here, forever trapped in a state of unrest. Another common sighting is that of spectral figures moving in the snow. Many have reported seeing the shadow of a person or a group of people moving through the snow-covered mountains. These figures are often seen at night and are said to be the ghosts of the Donner Party members who perished in the snow. Some have even reported seeing a campfire in the distance, only to have it vanish when they approach. But perhaps the most disturbing reports are of full-bodied apparitions. Some have reported seeing the ghost of a man in a top hat and a woman in a Victorian nightgown, wandering along the shore of Donner Lake. It's said that these are the ghosts of two Donner Party members who died tragically, a man who shot his wife before taking his own life. There are also reports of a headless horseman who can be seen riding through the forest. Some say he's just a regular ghost, while others believe he may be the ghost of George Donner himself, the leader of the party. He was known for his hot temper, and some say he lashed out and killed several party members before the group resorted to cannibalism. It's important to note that not everyone believes these stories. Some say they're just tales meant to scare people away from the area. But there are too many reports to simply dismiss them all as fiction. So, what do you think? Are these stories true, or just a bunch of made-up horror? Let us know in the comments below. In addition to these ghostly encounters, there have also been reports of strange occurrences in the area. Hikers have reported finding strange markings in the snow that they can't explain. Some have even reported finding human bones, which turned out to be the remains of the Donner Party members. It's clear that the mountains hold many secrets, and some of them may be best left undisturbed. While some may choose to dismiss these stories as mere superstition, others believe that the spirits of the Donner Party still roam the Sierra Nevadas, forever trapped in a state of unrest. As you plan your next camping trip, keep in mind that you may not be alone. Who knows? You might just make contact with one of the lost souls of the Donner Party. What are your thoughts on the stories of the ghosts of the Donner Party? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. See you soon.